everybody. Hope you are hanging in there. We are getting close to being done with our study of Genesis. I think we have probably 2 more sessions after this one. So today we're going to look at the story of Jacob and Esau. That's Isaac's sons, Abraham's grandsons. We're going to be dealing with Genesis chapter 25 to 33, particularly 25, 27, 32, and 33. So I encourage you to go read those chapters. I'll do what I can to summarize the stories, but there's nothing like actually digging into the biblical text yourself. So why don't you go ahead and pause the video now. Shouldn't take you too long. Again, it's chapters 25, 27, and 32 to 33. Okay, so Jacob and Esau, as you saw, are twins. And they're at each other's throat before they're even born. The children struggled together within their mother's womb. And she said, "If it is to be this way, why do I live?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples born of you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other. The elder shall serve the younger." When her time to give birth was at hand, there were twins in her womb. The first came out all red, his body like a hairy mantle. We'll talk about that in a minute. So they named him Esau. Afterward, his brother came out, with his hand gripping Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. Now, in this intentionally minimalist narrative, as we so often get in Genesis, we're not given a lot of detail about these characters. Just that when the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man living in tents. Isaac loved Esau because he was fond of game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So I think you can already see the kind of caricature that you're supposed to pick up here. Esau is the rugged, hairy outdoorsman, perennial jock, and Jacob is soft, a mama's boy, but sharp as a tack. The other thing that you need to know to understand this story is that in ancient Near Eastern culture, it's customary for the family's eldest son to inherit the largest portion of the family's estate. This is not arbitrary or unfair. You've got to remember that we're not talking about liquid assets here. There are no stocks, no trusts. In the ancient Near East, a family's wealth consisted primarily in land and in herds, or possibly in crops. Ensuring the continued survival of the family, then, means ensuring that some continuous majority of the family's herds stay together. And so, the eldest son does not receive a double portion of the inheritance, what's called the birthright, so that he can live out his days fat and happy. He gets it because the blessing is also passed on to him, the responsibility to continue to care for the rest of the family after the patriarch has passed. And he'll need the birthright, the extra land and animals, to carry out the responsibility of this blessing. So you've seen this structure before. Remember, Abraham was called out from among the nations. Later, his people Israel would be called God's firstborn son. And why was Abraham chosen? To be God's favorite special person? No. I will bless you so that you will be a blessing. And through you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. So that the life-giving divine energy that flowed out of Eden to the whole world now mysteriously will flow through Abraham. He's like a firstborn son caring for all of God's other children. Now, Jacob and Esau are twins. But remember, Esau came out first, with Jacob grabbing at his heel. Just that few seconds makes Esau the rightful heir to the family's meager fortunes. And Jacob will continue, as it were, grabbing at Esau's heel, trying to find a way to weasel himself into that privileged position. The first story to this effect comes right after the birth story. Once, when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the field, and he was famished. Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff, for I am famished." Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright." And Esau said, "I'm about to die. What use is a birthright to me?" Jacob said, "Swear to me first." He swore to him, sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank, and rose and went his way. So now Jacob has the birthright, but the blessing is still due Esau. But when their father, Isaac, old, blind, on his deathbed, realizes that it's time to pass on his blessing, he asks Esau to go hunt some game and make a nice meal. He wants the occasion to be met with appropriate ceremony. The boy's mother, Rebekah, overhears this request. And this time, it is she who hatches a plan to see to it that the blessing goes to her special boy. So while Esau is out hunting game, Rebekah cooks up some goat meat, just like Isaac likes it. She dresses Jacob in Esau's clothes so that he smells like the woods, and puts furs on his hands and arms so that he'll feel hairy like his brother. And together they trick the old blind man into transferring the blessing to him, Jacob, the younger son, rather than to his eldest son, Esau. Just about this time, Esau, the real Esau, saunters in with his wild game and learns that his younger brother Jacob has once again tricked him out of what is rightfully his. Blows right past the Nile and straight into bargaining. "Dad," he says, "please, is there anything left for me?" And Isaac responds with this sort of half blessing. Let's see. Sorry, I have to find it here. Then his father Isaac answered him, "See, away from the fatness of the earth your home shall be, and away from the dew of heaven on high. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. But when you break loose, you shall break his yoke from your neck." Hold on to that line. It'll be important in a minute. So then Esau jumps right back to anger. "The days of mourning my father are approaching," he says. "But then," he vows, "I will kill my brother Jacob." Now, do you remember I told you a couple of weeks ago that Genesis is a collection of jealous brother stories? Well, Jacob and Esau is the jealous brother story par excellence. Do you see the pattern? Once again, despite convention, the younger brother is chosen instead of the older. And the older brother vows to kill the younger. In our first jealous brother story, Cain succeeded in killing his younger brother. Ishmael didn't kill Isaac, but the estranged half-brothers never reconciled, and they represented two peoples who would be at war for ages hence. What happens between Jacob and Esau then? Well, let's see. Jacob knows that his brother is gunning for him, so he packs up and he hits the road. And karma being what it is, Jacob ends up staying with his uncle Laban, who tricks him into becoming an indentured servant, much like Jacob had tricked his own father and brother to secure the family birthright and blessing. But you can't con a con man. After 15 years and some sly dealing, Jacob ends up making off with most of Laban's considerable fortune. Jacob is now a rich man, but he's still on the run. And word has it that all these years later, Esau may finally have caught up to him. So Jacob sends a messenger out to Esau to shower him with gifts, donkeys and goats and oxen, to butter him up before begging for mercy. Do you see what's happening here? Jacob may be the same conniving lowlife he always was, but he's incidentally doing what the birthright and blessing are made to do. He's caring for the material needs of his brother, not with a double portion of his father's meager estate, but with the majority share of their uncle Laban's considerable estate. Despite himself, Jacob is using his blessing to bless his brother. Just as Abraham was chosen from among the nations in order that through him all the nations of the earth would be blessed. But Esau seems not to be interested in the bribe. He sends back word with the messengers that he wants to see Jacob in person. So, Jacob sends his family and all of his servants away so that no one gets caught in the crossfire. He spends the night alone at the ford of the Jabbok. And there he wrestles with is it a man or an angel or God? You know what, why don't you read Genesis 32 yourself and see if you can figure it out. Whoever it is, they can't seem to best Jacob, even after wrestling all night, until, with no more than a touch, they dislocate his hip. It's after that encounter that Jacob is renamed Israel, the one who wrestles with God. The next morning, Jacob, now Israel, finally comes face to face with his brother Esau. Jacob does all the preparatory work he can think of. He divides up his children into two groups in case Esau decides to attack them, then at least maybe the other group can escape. He approaches Esau with great pomp and circumstance, bowing low to the ground several times. But when Esau sees him, he embraces him and kisses him, and they both weep and then dote on their newfound nieces and nephews. And Jacob continued to shower his brother with gifts, no longer from a conniving, self-serving posture, but from a real spirit of gratitude. Now, I want to pause here just to note that most modern critical scholars of the Bible understand these Jacob and Esau narratives to be etiological in character, meaning they explain what seemed to the original audience to be a prominent feature of a place or a group of people by attributing those features to a founding character or event. That's why Israel is called Israel, because its founder, Jacob, had a wrestling match with God. Incidentally, it explains an apparently odd point of kosher food law as well, that the hip socket of an animal must be removed. Well, says the author, this goes back to the Jacob story as well. And what about Esau? At the time of the writing of these narratives, the nation of Judah, which was part of the former Union of Israel, was at rivalry with a nation called Edom, of which Esau is said to be the founder. So, of course, Esau is depicted as a big, dumb jock. But there's more. Remember, we're told that Esau came out red. Well, the Hebrew word for red, Adome, sounds quite a bit like Edom. We're also told that he was hairy. Might seem like this is just a good setup for the later story in which Jacob tricks his father by putting animal furs on his arms. But it's likely that story developed after the setup. For the Hebrew word for hairy, Seir, sounds like Edom's sacred mountain, Seir. The author really doesn't want you to miss this identification. And according to Genesis' own narrative, Edom really was like an older brother to Israel. It was a sovereign nation, while Israel was still a group of disparate and sometimes warring tribes. But around the beginning of the 10th century before the Common Era, a king named David, maybe you've heard of him, succeeded in unifying the tribes of Israel and conquering the Edomites. You can read about that in the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 8. But the conquest didn't last long. By the time of the reign of David's son, Solomon, Edom won their emancipation, which you can read about in 1 Kings chapter 11. Remember Isaac's words to Esau after Jacob had stolen the blessing? You shall serve your brother, but when you break loose, you shall break his yoke from your neck. This is why scholars can pretty confidently date these stories to the latter half of the 10th century BCE, when Edom had already won its independence, but the rivalry between the nations still raged. So these modern critical scholars are no doubt right about the history and politics that lay behind these texts. But there's more than just history and politics here, isn't there? These texts are about Israel's life with God, and perhaps our lives with God too. In the story of Jacob and Esau, we see the vocation of the people of God. They will be the ones constantly wrestling with God, Israel. Do you ever find yourself striving with God? You know, if you read carefully through the rest of the Bible, you will not find a people who happily serve and defend God at every turn. You're far more likely to find a people yelling at the top of their lungs, "Where are you, God? Just what do you think you're doing? This is not the kingdom you promised." Like the protesters in Minneapolis and around the country, they cry out, "Where is the justice, God? Where is the peace? Don't you have promises to keep?" And you will find a people like their grandfather Jacob who, in spite of themselves, in spite of their best failings, become a blessing to their siblings, through whom, ultimately, the life-giving energy of God flows to the entire world. Okay, next time we will finish up the book of Genesis so you can read the story of Joseph in advance. It's a little bit longer. It goes from chapter 37 all the way to the end of the book. So we'll do that next time, and then we'll have one more session to wrap up. Thanks a lot. Have a good week.